In the previous lessons, we've surveyed the history of Homo sapiens from the cognitive revolution 70,000 years ago up to the present day. In the last lesson of the course, I want to take a look at the potential future of Homo sapiens. What is going to happen to our species in the coming century or two? In all likelihood, our species is going to disappear. We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens. In the medium future, within a few decades or a couple of centuries at most, Homo sapiens will disappear. Now, I don't think that our species will annihilate itself in some nuclear or environmental catastrophe. Rather, our species will disappear because it is going to upgrade itself into a completely different kind of being. As we saw in the previous lessons, there have already been many far-reaching revolutions in history: political, social, cultural, and technological revolutions. Yet, through all these revolutions, for tens of thousands of years, one thing remained relatively constant, and this is the humans themselves, Homo sapiens itself. This is a great constant of history. The sapiens mind and the sapiens body have been the constant base on which all societies, all identities, all religions have been founded. Our world today is very different from the world of, say, biblical times. But people in ancient Jerusalem in the time of the Bible had the same basic bodily and mental abilities that we have today. They, the people in the past, experienced the world in roughly the same way that we experience it today. And this is why we still find much of interest in the Bible, or in the philosophy of Plato, or in the writings of Confucius, because they were written by people just like you and me. This, however, is about to change. The next big revolution in history will, of course, transform the economy and politics and society and all that. But it will also transform our bodies and our minds. And it will replace Homo sapiens with a very different kind of being. When we think about the future, we usually think about a world in which people like you and me will enjoy better technology. They will have light-speed spaceships. They will have laser guns. They will have intelligent robots and so forth. This is what we usually imagine. But the truly revolutionary potential of technology is to change people and not just our tools and our weapons. It's not the spaceships that are going to be different in the future. It's the beings that travel in the spaceships that will be different. Now, how exactly will Homo sapiens upgrade itself into a different kind of being? At present, there are three main methods that humans seem to be able to use in order to upgrade themselves. The first method is biological engineering. The second method is cyborg engineering. Cyborgs are beings that combine organic with non-organic parts. These are cyborgs. And the third method for upgrading Homo sapiens is by engineering inorganic life, life which is not based at all on organic parts. I will now try to examine briefly these three methods so that you understand what we are talking about. So the first method that might be used to upgrade Homo sapiens into a new kind of being is biological engineering. Biological engineering is any deliberate intervention on the biological level, for example, implanting a gene or taking some drug, which is aimed to modify the shape, the capabilities, the needs, or the desires of an organism. There is nothing new about biological engineering per se. People have been using biological engineering for thousands upon thousands of years in order to reshape themselves and in order to reshape other organisms, like dogs and cows and horses and so forth. A simple example of biological engineering is castration. Humans have been castrating bulls for perhaps 10,000 years in order to create oxen. Oxen are less aggressive than bulls and are therefore easier to train and to dominate and to make them pull wagons and carts and plows and so forth. So this is biological engineering. You take a bull who is very aggressive, you castrate it, you get an ox, which is much more easier to manipulate. Humans have similarly used castration on themselves, castrating young men or children in order to create soprano singers with wonderful voices, or in order to create castrated eunuchs who could safely guard the harm of the sultan or of the emperor without any danger that they may do something with the sultan's women because they can't. So this is the advantage of castrating men. But so this is biological engineering, and it's not new in itself. What is new is the degree, the abilities of today's biological engineering. Recent advances in our understanding of how organisms work, down to the cellular and molecular levels, have opened up before us possibilities for biological engineering which previously were simply unimaginable. For example, today we can not only castrate a man, which is relatively simple, but we can use all kinds of hormonal and surgical treatments in order to turn this man into a woman, to change his sex. This is far more ambitious than just castration. And that's not all. Look, for example, at this photograph. This photograph was published in 1996, almost 20 years ago, and when it appeared, it sent shockwaves around the world. It caused a very huge storm. Now, this is a real photograph of a real mouse. It is not something that somebody created on Photoshop. It's a real mouse. What you see here is a very real mouse on whose back scientists have implanted the cartilage cells which they took from cattle, from cows. Now, the scientists were able not only to implant these cow cells on the back of the mouse, but also to control the growth of the new tissue and to shape it into something that looks very similar to a human ear. And they can shape it into all kinds of other shapes that they want. This process is now used in all kinds of laboratories and hospitals in order to try and manufacture artificial ears and other artificial organic structures that can then be implanted in humans, for example, somebody who lost his ear. Now, this photograph is a kind of eerie echo of the Lion Man statue from the Stadel cave that we encountered in the second lesson of this course. In the case of the Lion Man from the Stadel cave, humans imagined a combination of a human and a lion. Now, 30,000 years ago, people could think about such a hybrid creature, half human, half lion, and they could make an ivory statue of such a creature, But nobody 30,000 years ago knew how to actually produce a living being which is half this, half that. Today, humans are acquiring the ability to actually produce such beings with the help of very sophisticated biological engineering. This mouse that you see here is a real combination of parts taken from cattle with a mouse, with the body of a mouse. Of all the kinds of biological engineerings that we see today developing, the one that attracts the most attention is genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is based on taking genes from one organism and implanting these genes in the DNA of a different organism. For example, today, we know, and it is often done, we know how to take a gene from a jellyfish that glows in a green fluorescent light and to implant this gene in a rabbit or a monkey, which then also start to glow in a green fluorescent light. It has been done in monkeys. It can be done with humans too. We have now the technology to take this gene from a jellyfish, to implant it in a human DNA, and you will get a human being that glows in a green fluorescent light. It hasn't actually been done because of all kinds of ethical prohibitions, but technically we know how to do it. Another example concerns the genetic engineering of all kinds of microorganisms. The bacteria E. coli has been genetically engineered by scientists to produce biofuel. Lots of biofuel in order to try and solve the energy problems of the world. The same bacteria, E. coli, and other species of microorganisms and fungi have also been genetically engineered to start producing insulin and thereby lower the cost of insulin and the cost of diabetes treatment. Another interesting example is that scientists extracted a gene from a kind of Arctic fish that lives in the Arctic Ocean and inserted this gene from the fish into the DNA of potatoes in order to make the potatoes more resistant to frost and to cold conditions. Genetic engineering is used increasingly not only on microorganisms and jellyfish and potatoes, it is also used on mammals. For example, every year the dairy industry, the milk industry, suffers billions of dollars of damages due to a disease called mastitis. Mastitis is a disease that strikes dairy cows, the udders of dairy cows, and causes all kinds of problems there. Scientists are currently experimenting with genetically engineered cows that the milk of those genetically engineered cows contains a biochemical called lysostaphine. And this biochemical attacks the bacteria which cause mastitis, and the scientists hope that in this way the problem of mastitis will be solved by genetically engineering these cows, these dairy cows. Geneticists have already managed to engineer also other mammals like mice and rats. They've managed to engineer genius mice that display not only different physical qualities, but genius mice that display that have improved cognitive abilities, improved memory, improved learning skills. Now, how do you know, how do you measure the cognitive ability of a mouse? It's not so difficult. You have all these mazes that scientists give mice to solve. You put the mouse in the maze, and there are all kinds of levels of difficulty for the mazes, and you see that the genetically engineered mouse is able to solve a normal maze much quicker than a normal mouse, And the genius genetically engineered mouse is able to solve very difficult mazes that normal mice cannot solve. So we have here evidence of a real cognitive change brought about by genetic engineering. Now, if you can do such things to mice, you can certainly do them to Homo sapiens as well. The abilities, the needs, the desires of Homo sapiens, just like those of mice, have a genetic basis. And the sapiens DNA is not much more complex than the DNA of mice. The sapiens genome is only 14% larger than the genome of mice. That's practically the same level of complexity. So there is no technical reason why we couldn't start engineering superhumans, or why we couldn't create entire new species of humans different from Homo sapiens. In the medium range, perhaps in a few decades or a century or two, genetic engineering and other forms of biological engineering might well enable us to make far-reaching changes, not only in our physiology and in our immune system and in our life expectancy, but they will also enable us to make major changes to our intellectual and emotional capacities. If genetic engineering can create genius mice, there is no obvious reason why it couldn't create superhuman, genius humans. And if you remember, the cognitive revolution that turned Homo sapiens from an insignificant African ape into the master of the world did not require any noticeable change in human physiology. It did not even require a change in the size and external shape of the human brain. Apparently, the cognitive revolution resulted from a few small changes in the internal structure of the sapiens brain. So perhaps another relatively small change in the human brain brought about with, say, genetic engineering would be enough to ignite the second cognitive revolution, to create a completely new kind of consciousness and to transform Homo sapiens into something very, very different from us. Something different from us, just as we are different from the Neanderthals. Now, we are still not there, don't worry, we are still not there in 2013, but there seems no insurmountable technical gap separating us from the production of such superhumans. The main obstacles on the way to the creation of superhumans are not technical. The main obstacles are ethical and political objections that slow down the research on humans. The research on mice is much more advanced than the research on humans because of these ethical and political considerations. And no matter how convincing these ethical and political arguments are, it is very hard to see how they could hold back the next step in the process indefinitely or even for very long. Especially because what is at stake here is the possibility of prolonging human life indefinitely, giving humans indefinite lifespans, living forever. What is at stake is conquering all kinds of diseases like cancer and Alzheimer and so forth. And what is at stake is upgrading our cognitive and emotional abilities. So it's unlikely that these ethical and political objections will indefinitely prevent the research from going forward. What would happen, for example, if scientists managed to develop a cure for Alzheimer's disease that at the same time, as a side benefit, could also dramatically improve the memories or the cognitive abilities of healthy people. Would any government or any combination of governments would be able to stop the relevant research? And if this cure, this technique is indeed developed, would any government or any police be able to limit the usage of this invention only to cure Alzheimer's patients and to prevent healthy people from using this technology to acquire super memories and all kinds of amazing cognitive abilities? It is unlikely. So this is the first method by which Homo sapiens might upgrade itself quite soon into something completely different: biological engineering. In the next segment of this lesson, we will examine two other methods that we might use to upgrade ourselves: engineering cyborgs and engineering non-organic life.